April 19th, 1945. A forest clearing in Bavaria, Germany. 31 German women huddled inside a wooden medical hut, watching flames devour the trees around them. Smoke poured through the cracks in the walls. The heat pressed against their skin like a physical weight. They were going to die. But that wasn't what terrified them most. Through the thickening smoke, they saw silhouettes moving toward them. American helmets, American rifles, American soldiers. And for 12 years they had been told one thing over and over: Americans are monsters. They will torture you in ways you cannot imagine. Death is better than capture. Some women reached for cyanide capsules hidden in their pockets. Others pressed themselves against the far wall, choosing fire over what they believed would come through that door. If stories like this one move you, please take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. These forgotten moments of humanity buried in the chaos of war deserve to be remembered and shared. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps keep these stories alive for future generations who need to hear them. The door crashed open. 3 American soldiers burst through the smoke, rifles slung across their backs, wet cloths covering their faces. Sergeant William Cooper from Ohio was the first inside. He was 26 years old. He had fought across France and into Germany. He had seen cities reduced to ash and bodies stacked like cordwood. But he had never seen a group of women so clearly expecting to be killed. They stared at him with eyes that held no hope, only terror. One woman whispered something in broken English. "Quick death. Please. Honor." Cooper lowered his hands and shouted the only German words he knew. "Kommen Sie. Fire. Schnell. Schnell." Cooper lowered his hands and shouted the only German words he knew. "Kommen Sie. Fire. Schnell." The women didn't move. Their minds couldn't process what they were seeing. Why weren't the Americans attacking? Why did they look concerned? And then Cooper did something that shattered everything these women believed. He stepped forward, gently took one woman's arm, and pulled her toward the door. Not roughly, not violently. With the same care he would show his own sister. In that moment, Ingrid Muller, a 29-year-old nurse from Munich, realized that everything she had been taught was a lie. The fire had started 2 hours earlier, when American artillery shelled German positions 3 kilometers to the east. A stray round landed in dry undergrowth. April had been unusually warm that year. The forest floor was covered with dead leaves and brittle branches that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Within minutes, a wall of orange flames was racing through the pine trees toward the medical camp. Ingrid smelled it before she saw it, thick smoke that burned her throat and made her eyes water. Then came the crackling sound, like thousands of small bones breaking at once. Someone screamed, "The camp is burning." 23 women ran toward the main medical hut, the largest building with the thickest walls. 8 others scattered, some already cut off by flames that moved faster than anyone expected. The first hut caught within seconds. Dry timber and straw roofing burned like paper. The heat became unbearable. These women were not combat soldiers. They were auxiliaries, nurses, radio operators, clerks assigned to support Wehrmacht units retreating through Bavaria. Most had joined the auxiliary corps in 1943, when Germany began mobilizing every available person for the war effort. They had trained to treat wounded soldiers, manage field communications, and keep records. They wore gray uniforms with Red Cross armbands. They took oaths of loyalty to the Reich, and they absorbed, like everyone else in Germany, years of propaganda about what would happen if they fell into enemy hands. The Ministry of Propaganda had been clear and consistent. American soldiers were criminals released from prisons to fight. They were racially inferior, morally corrupt, capable of unspeakable violence. Surrender meant torture, violation, death. Better to die with honor than face what the enemy would do. Ingrid had believed it, not because she was stupid or cruel, but because it was all she had ever heard. In school, in newspapers, on the radio, in training, the message never changed. The Allies were monsters. Germany was fighting for survival against barbaric forces that wanted to destroy the German people. She had seen refugees from the Eastern Front with stories about Soviet troops. Those stories were real and horrific. It wasn't hard to believe the Americans would be the same. So when the door burst open and she saw American helmets silhouetted against the flames, her first instinct was to reach for the small glass capsule in her pocket. Cyanide. Quick and final. A way out? But Cooper's hand on her arm was gentle. His eyes, visible above the wet cloth covering his face, looked worried, not cruel, not hungry for violence, just worried like a man trying to save someone from danger. He pulled her toward the door, and she stumbled after him, too shocked to resist. Outside, 2 more G's were helping other women out of the hut. One soldier had simply picked up a young nurse named Clara who had fainted from smoke inhalation and was carrying her like a child. Another was wrapping a blanket around an older woman's shoulders. The scene made no sense. This wasn't torture. This wasn't violence. This was rescue. The women stumbled away from the burning camp, coughing and gasping in the cool air. Behind them, flames consumed the wooden huts completely. Within 20 minutes, nothing remained but smoking foundations and charred support beams. If the Americans hadn't come, all 31 women would have died. Sergeant Cooper did a quick head count, then radioed for transport. 3 trucks arrived within the hour. The women were loaded into the back, not thrown or shoved, but helped up by soldiers who offered their hands. Ingrid sat on a wooden bench, pressed between other women who looked as confused as she felt. Nobody spoke during the 2-hour drive. They just watched their American guards with careful, suspicious eyes, waiting for the cruelty to begin. It had to begin eventually. Everything they had been taught said so. The trucks stopped at a large facility outside the town of Heilbronn. It had been a German military base before the Americans captured it. Now American flags flew from the watchtowers. Rows of tents stretched across open fields, organized in neat rows. Barbed wire surrounded everything, but it looked more administrative than threatening markers of boundaries, not instruments of torture. The women were helped down from the trucks. An officer offered his hand to each woman as she climbed down. Some refused, still expecting a trick. Others accepted, too exhausted to resist. They were led to a processing area where American officers sat behind folding tables with clipboards and typewriters. Each woman gave her name, age, and unit. The process was calm, professional, almost boring. One officer even said "Danke" after Ingrid answered his questions. Then came the showers. The women tensed when they were directed toward a concrete building with steam rising from vents in the roof. Showers. They had heard terrible stories about showers from refugees fleeing the Eastern Front. stories about what happened to German women in Soviet captivity. Some women began to cry. Others held hands, preparing for the worst. But inside they found only hot water. Real hot water flowing freely from metal shower heads bolted to the ceiling. Steam filled the room. Bars of soap, actual soap, not the ersatz garbage they'd been using for months, sat on small shelves. Clean towels waited in stacks by the door. A female American officer stood near the entrance. "Go ahead," she said in accented but clear German. "Take your time. You're safe here." Ingrid was the first to step under the water. It poured over her body, washing away weeks of dirt, smoke, and fear. She stood there for 10 minutes, hardly believing it was real. Around her, other women did the same. Some laughed, some wept. Clara simply stood with her face turned upward, letting the water run across her closed eyes. After showers, they received clean clothes, simple gray dresses, undergarments, socks. Not prison uniforms, just normal clothes that fit reasonably well. They were given combs, small mirrors, and basic toiletries, things that felt like luxuries after months of deprivation. Then came dinner. The mess hall served food at 6 o'clock. The women sat at long wooden tables and stared at their plates in disbelief. Bread, real bread, soft and white, not the sawdust mixed stuff they'd been eating since 1943, canned beef with gravy, vegetables that weren't rotten, coffee with actual sugar. The meal contained more calories than Ingrid had eaten in the past 3 days combined. American military records from April 1945 show that POW rations provided approximately 2,800 calories per day more than most German civilians were receiving at the time. The Reich was starving. American prison camps were not. Margaret, a 42-year-old clerk from Hamburg, ate slowly with tears running down her weathered face. "Why?" she whispered to Ingrid. "Why do they feed us like this? We are their enemies." Ingrid had no answer. That night they slept on real cots with real wool blankets, thick and warm against the April chill. Guards walked the perimeter outside, but no one entered their tent. No one bothered them. The only sounds were generators humming and distant American voices speaking in that strange, flat language. Ingrid lay awake for hours, staring at the canvas ceiling. Her mind kept returning to the same impossible question. For 12 years she had been told that Americans were monsters, uncivilized brutes, enemies of everything German. But monsters didn't offer their hands to help you from trucks. Monsters didn't give you hot showers and soft bread. Either the propaganda was wrong, or this was an elaborate trick. By morning, she wasn't sure which possibility frightened her more. The transformation didn't happen all at once. It happened in small moments that accumulated like drops of water wearing away stone. On the third morning, an American medic came to check on the women's burns. His name was Private James Martinez from New Mexico. He was 23 years old, with gentle hands and a quiet manner. He cleaned burns with careful attention, applied white bandages, and gave out pills for pain. As he worked on Clara's burned forearm, he pulled a photograph from his pocket. It showed a young woman holding a baby. "My wife," he said, pointing. "Maria. And my son, Michael, 3 months old. I haven't seen him yet." He looked at Clara with tired eyes. "You have family?" Clara nodded slowly. She pulled her own photograph from the small bag she'd been allowed to keep. Her mother and father standing in front of their house in Stuttgart. her younger brother in his school uniform. The photograph was wrinkled and smoke-stained. Martinez studied it respectfully. "Nice family," he said. Then he added quietly, "I hope they're safe. Such a simple thing." But Clara thought about it for days. This American soldier hoped her family was safe. The enemy was worried about German civilians. It made no sense according to everything she had been taught, but it was real. She had seen his eyes. He meant it. The language barrier began to shrink. Some of the younger guards started teaching the women English words. Hello, thank you. Please, good morning. In return, the women taught them German. The exchanges were awkward and filled with mistakes, but people on both sides tried. Sergeant Cooper visited often. He brought small gifts when he could, a chocolate bar, an orange, once a magazine with photographs of American cities. New York's impossible tall buildings. California's beaches that looked like postcards from another planet. "When this is over," he told Ingrid through a translator, "you can visit America if you want. We don't hate German people. We hate what your government did." The distinction was important. Ingrid had never heard it before. In Nazi Germany, there was no separation between people and government. To oppose the government was to betray the people. But Cooper was suggesting something different. That ordinary Germans were not the same as Nazi leaders. That hatred could be specific rather than total. One evening, a group of American soldiers brought a record player to the compound. They played music, American jazz, that sounded wild and free. Some G's started dancing with each other, clowning around, trying to make the women laugh. At first, the women watched with stiff suspicion. Then, Clara smiled. Then someone else laughed. Within minutes, even Margaret was tapping her foot to the strange rhythm. A corporal named Bobby Washington from Chicago taught them a dance called the jitterbug. His movements were energetic and joyful. Several women tried to copy him, stumbling over the steps, laughing at their own awkwardness. The sound of that laughter, free and unguarded, was something none of them had experienced in years. Statistics from American POW camps in Germany show that by May 1945, over 280,000 German prisoners were being held by U.S. forces. The camps followed Geneva Convention rules strictly. Red Cross inspectors found conditions generally satisfactory. Rations were adequate. Medical care was provided. Violence against prisoners was rare and punished. But numbers cannot capture what these small kindnesses meant to women who expected brutality. Ingrid wrote in a small notebook she had been given. Her entry from April 25th read, "They give us coffee with sugar. They ask about our families. They play music and try to make us smile. Either we have been lied to about everything, or this is a dream. I do not know which frightens me more." The gap between what they had been taught and what they were experiencing grew wider each day, and then came news that would make that gap unbridgeable. News that would force them to confront not just propaganda about the enemy, but propaganda about their own nation. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler killed himself in a bunker beneath Berlin. The news reached the POW camp 2 days later. An American officer gathered the German prisoners in the main yard and made the announcement through a translator. Hitler was dead. The Reich was collapsing. Germany would surrender within days. The women stood in silence. No one cried. No one spoke. They simply absorbed the information like people who had stopped feeling anything. For 12 years, Hitler had been everywhere. His photograph hung in every school, every office, every home. His voice crackled from radios. His name was invoked in oaths and prayers. Now he was dead. And Germany was not victorious. It was destroyed. Ingrid felt something crack inside her chest. Not grief exactly. Something more complicated. The framework that had organized her entire adult life was simply gone. What did anything mean if the Reich could fall? If the Führer could die like any ordinary man? On May 8th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and 4 months. That evening, the women gathered in their tent without being ordered to. They simply gravitated together, needing to be near others who understood. For a long time, nobody said anything. Then Margaret spoke. "My husband died at Stalingrad. My brother died in France. I told myself their deaths meant something, that they were sacrifices for Germany's future." She looked at her rough hands. "What future? There is nothing." 1 week after the surrender, American officers assembled all the German POWs in the largest tent. They had set up a film projector and a white screen. "We want you to see something," said the camp commander through his translator. "We want you to understand what your government did." The films came from concentration camps, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald. American and British forces had liberated these camps in recent weeks. What they found had shocked even battle-hardened soldiers. The projector clicked to life. For the next 30 minutes, the prisoners watched in silence as images flickered on the screen. Piles of skeletal corpses stacked like firewood. Living skeletons with hollow eyes staring at the camera. Gas chambers disguised as showers. Ovens built to burn human bodies by the hundreds. Mountains of shoes, glasses, human hair sorted and stored. Statistics appeared on the screen. 6 million Jews murdered. Millions of others, Poles, Roma, disabled people. Political prisoners killed in systematic extermination programs that operated like factories. Some prisoners closed their eyes. Others vomited. Several fainted. But the American guards made them watch. "You need to see this," the commander said. "You need to know what was done in your name." When the lights came back on, Ingrid sat frozen. Her mind could not process what her eyes had seen. Those images couldn't be real. They had to be propaganda. Allied lies designed to make Germans feel guilty. But deep in her chest, she knew they were real. She had heard whispers during the war, rumors about camps in the East, about trains full of people who never came back. She had chosen not to ask questions. Everyone had chosen not to ask questions. "We didn't know," someone whispered. "We didn't know about this." Margaret's voice was flat and cold. "We didn't want to know. That's not the same thing." The words hung in the air like smoke. That night Ingrid wrote that captivity shattered everything she believed. Americans saved them from fire, fed them, treated wounds, and proved propaganda false. Repatriated in July 1945, the women crossed a Germany of rubble, hunger, refugees, and denial. At home, many faced bitterness. Prisoners looked too well fed. Allied crimes were easier to believe than Nazi truth. Years later, Ingrid taught students to question hatred. Margaret wrote that surviving meant witnessing guilt. Kindness, not bombs, burned away lies. Rescued enemies became mirrors, forcing them to see what they had served and unlearn it. This lesson endured across their lives forever.